Okay, so I think the way to begin, let me start by talking about the Changemaker's journey, right? Every single person on this call is on your own personal Changemaker's journey, right? You are on a path to fulfilling a social mission. And whether you're just at the beginning of that path or whether you're many years advanced, we're all on this journey. And fundraising is a significant component of the journey because without raising funds, it's not possible to move on to the next leg of the journey. So what I'd like to do is begin by telling you or sharing with you a story. And this is a story about a person, right? An individual. And you may in a moment recognize who this person is, okay? But it's a person who comes up with a fantastic idea, right? Something happened to them early on in their life or at some point in their career, and they came up with an idea. And it was an idea that has massive social impact, right? They realized that they could find a way of helping others, in a really, really significant way, okay? So what does this person do? Well, what she did was she launches a charity, right? Because that's typically how we expect organizations that have a mission to operate. They launch a nonprofit, and they raise grants, right? That's how charities are funded. So our social entrepreneur comes up with a great idea to help a lot of people. The natural way of doing this is to raise grants and get that charity going, right? And guess what? It's a real success, right? The charity grows, it proves its impact, and it begins to make a real difference in the lives of people, right? But our story doesn't stop there. Because what happens is that a few years on, after this idea has launched and the charity has begun, and they've raised grants and they've proven their impact, something starts to happen that starts to become problematic. And what has to happen, what happens is that funding starts to become a problem, right? Because there aren't enough grants in order to be able to achieve the goals and the mission of this charity, right? And so within a few years, our poor CEO is spending 90% of their time fundraising. And it's a pretty demoralizing and it's a pretty dangerous process, right? Always going around asking for money, the same funders, being told the same story, that there isn't enough funding, that come back next year, or we can fund you, but we may not be there next year. And so the CEO is basically spending 90% of their time fundraising and 10% of their time running the business or running the charity and the organization, okay? And they're probably tearing their hair out, and they're probably feeling very stressed, very overwhelmed, and there's never enough visibility of whether they'll be able to continue in the next 6 months or not, right? So the grants are unreliable, and they're going to run out at some stage, right? And you can't grow the organization. So the question on everyone's mind is there an alternative? Is there something else that we could tap into? This promise that we've heard about called social investment that potentially could unlock the door to significantly more and better funding. Okay, so I'm going to stop here for a second and ask you this. Does this sound familiar to you? Okay, and if anyone is nodding along and resonating with this, and I suspect that pretty much everyone on this call is going to be resonating with this. This is absolutely typical, right? This is the story of every single Ashoka Fellow we've ever worked with. And my team at Ashoka has worked with more than 200 fellows and social entrepreneurs over the last decade. Every single one, almost without exception, has told us the story that you've just heard today. And so really, our mission is to help the social entrepreneurs who are stuck in that trap, that fundraising trap, to try and find creative ways to break out of that trap. And the good news is that actually there are more and more Ashoka Fellows, more and more social entrepreneurs who are actually doing this. They're actually finding ways to unlock the funding gate in order to be able to scale up and achieve their mission, right? So I think we on this team just did a very informal sort of count of how many of our clients, our fellows, have raised money. It's over 100 now, in the last few years. And the amount that they've raised is over $250 million in finance. And these are projects that you would not necessarily expect to be the most easily to be funded. So we're talking about projects that are working with street kids and bringing education to people in 40 countries, like Streetwise, for example. We're talking about projects that are doing water and sanitation in rural villages in Bangladesh. We're talking about conservation projects in South Africa, forestry and land. And most, and in fact, nearly all of the clients that we've worked with, right, never believed at the beginning that they could raise the money, right? Because, how do you fund educating street kids in Bangladesh? I mean, or any of these things. So there is this dilemma that's faced. And the feedback that you get from the commercial world is that this is actually not doable, right? People again and again are told there's no money in this. You have to be profitable in order to succeed. You have to be able to generate significant financial returns to be able to interest so-called investors into this process, right? And so the door is basically slammed, if you were to go to conventional sources of finance in order to raise this. And so the answer is, yes, that's true, but only if you play the game as it's currently structured. And what our entrepreneurs do is they find ways to change the game. They find ways to make social impact into an asset, not a liability. They find a way to create a business model that combines doing good with doing well. They find ways to engage philanthropists and investors to come together to support what they do. And so the purpose of today is we want to put on the table a couple of alternative strategies for raising funds that you will not have heard from if you've gone to conventional financiers for, right? Because what we're going to do is we're going to take the playbook of finance and give it a social twist. And that social twist hopefully will spark some ideas for you in how you could apply that to your organization, right? So that's kind of our ambitious goal for this morning. Now, I actually don't have my chat box up for some reason. So Alex, or perhaps you could shout out and let me know as I go any questions that come up. Okay, actually no, I've just got it up. So can you hear me now? Is that okay, Sankara? Yeah. Okay, great. So that's kind of the social entrepreneur story, right? You start off as an NGO, you raise grants, you hit the plateau on what you can do with grants, and now you've got to diversify. And the question is, how do you do that? How do you bring in different types of funding? How do you mix it up? And how do you make it grow? Before I launch into a framework that might help you to do that, are there any quick questions or reactions on what I've just said? Does anyone just say, yes, that's me? Or no, that's, we've never had this issue before, or we just jumped straight to investment and we don't have this problem. Would anyone like any quick reactions on that? Otherwise, I'm just going to plow ahead and go for it. Okay, Alain is 100% familiar. Shona's knows this well. Marina the same. Okay, so let's talk about the toolbox. Let's talk about how we might be able to break up the traditional playbook. Okay, so this is where Ashoka comes in, right? Or this is where the Changemaker finance team comes in, because we've developed, having worked with our clients, a set of strategies and frameworks that we think you will find very, very helpful. And let me explain a little bit about what this is. Okay, so what I want to talk about first is the Changemakers Challenge, which is kind of what we've just touched on in this story about fundraising. Okay, basically, if you're an Ashoka Fellow or a Changemaker right now and you're pursuing a social mission, I'm 90% sure that you're probably funding yourself through grants right now. And you're probably, in your first few years, probably doing it 100% through grants, okay? Because that's the natural way in which people start. And as we all know, there's a huge problem with grants, right? Grants are unreliable. They are limited in capacity. They are rarely able to meet your ambition, right? So you cannot get enough grant funding to really grow and achieve what you want. And certainly once you've reached year 5, year 6, year 7, there's a plateau on what you can do with grants. And so there's an urgent need to diversify your revenue, to find alternative ways to raise funding beyond grants, right? And this is the story that virtually every single Ashoka Fellow in our network of 4,000 across 92 countries tells us, is that they need to break away from this, right? Because their operations aren't sustainable. You just can't cover your costs, certainly not at the level of ambition that I know that all of you guys have. And so the natural question is, can social investment, right, be the answer to that? And so what normally happens is the people who come and join us on these workshops, they want to know whether they can raise investment and whether that would be sufficient in order for them to be able to break away from grants. Is that the answer? And it's actually a more complex than just, is social investment the answer, right? Because the truth is this: it is possible to diversify your funding for your venture, right? It is absolutely possible to find multiple revenue streams beyond just classic grant raising for, I believe, pretty much every single venture that is out there. I don't believe that there is a socially mission-driven organization that is impossible not to diversify its forms of funding. But you have to be highly creative and imaginative about how you do it. And what we see is that there are three basic mistakes, at least three basic mistakes that you must avoid in order to be able to break out of the grant trap, right? And to solve the Changemakers challenge. And I just want to quickly describe to you what those three mistakes are, because what happens is that a lot of our clients, they go out and they try and raise this kind of funding, right? They write an investment pitch. They go and knock on as many doors as they can, and they're pitching for funding, and they're being told no repeatedly again and again and again. And they don't realize that what mistakes they're making, right? And there are three very classic mistakes that come up that are grounded in three common misconceptions about how funding works. Okay, so I'm just going to reveal these mistakes and then talk about the misconceptions that drive the reason why a social entrepreneur would make this mistake. These are very, very natural mistakes to make. And then I would love to hear from you whether this resonates, whether you've actually made this mistake, and whether you're actually banging your head on this barrier right now. And then we're going to introduce to you the framework for how to overcome these three barriers. Okay, so these are the challenges. The first one is that you're not clear about what it is that you are fundraising for. Okay, so many social entrepreneurs, what they do is they put together a pitch, and the pitch says, here is my organization, and this is what we do. Can we please have $1 million, right? And that sounds very natural, but if you do that, you're automatically on the back foot right away. And the reason for that is because it's never enough to say, here is our organization and this is how much funding we need. In order to be able to unlock fundraising, what you have to be able to do is you have to be able to give the funder some very specific project or asset for them to get behind and support, right? So we're going to show you a strategy for how you get down to the granular level of the project or the asset that you want to get funded. All right, so that's number one. People are pitching at the global level of their organization, right? You know, we are Teach for America, we are Teach for China, you know, etc. We are Kiva.org. Please fund us, right? That is a generalized pitch. It will not land because it is too generalized in order to be able to engage a specific funding ask, right? You have to narrow it down. You have to structure it in a way that can say, please fund this. And then you give the funder a very clear reason why this is the project that you need to fund, right? Related to this, when you're raising investment, you cannot just simply say, this is how much money we need, and therefore we're asking for this much investment, right? What you need to do is you have to put forward a project which is going to transform the capacity of your organization to deliver impact, okay? So in other words, funding business as usual is not what investment is designed for, right? If you're losing $1 million a year because the costs are too high, right? There is no way that you can go out to an investor and ask for $1 million in funding to fill that gap, right? That's what you might go for a grant funder for, and that's probably what you're doing right now, right? But for an investor, what you have to do is you have to literally put a project in front of them and say, if we can implement this project, this will change our ability to reach 10,000 women, right? And empower them with livelihoods and jobs, for example, because we need to build this factory. And once we have this factory, we can employ the women and give them good jobs, right? So you have to give them the project, which is the factory, and then you have to give them the change that that factory creates in your organization that takes you up to another level, because investment is designed to change capacity. It's not designed to fill an operating gap, right? So I'm going to come on to this in just a moment, but I'm going to, I just want to just quickly fly you through the very subtle changes of emphasis that need to be done in order to increase your ability to raise finance by literally 100-fold. Okay. So number one, clarity on what you're fundraising for. Projects, not organizations, is mistake number one. The second natural mistake to make is to assume that you should only be raising one kind of funds, right? So most people start and they only raise grants, and then they think, oh, maybe I should be a business, maybe I should raise investment. And so they start to switch and think about loans or about equity, right? And they assume that it's either or, that basically it's either it's a business raising investment or it's a charity raising grants, right? And so they kind of stuck, because it may be that what is suitable for one type of project is not suitable for another type of project, right? So if you have, for example, an organization that really needs to raise grants, because there are some parts of what you do that can't be funded because it doesn't have any revenue generation, essentially. You don't want to be having to raise grants for everything that you do, because there might be something else that you do that's actually a very attractive business. And there will be people who'd be quite happy to invest in the business, but they don't understand what it is that you're doing with the charity. And so the idea here is that you want to be able to maximize different types of funding for different types of project, right? And so we're going to show you a strategy around that. This will become a lot clearer, by the way, in just a moment. I'm giving you the abstract, but I'm going to narrow down to some specific examples in just a moment. And the final and the absolutely classic mistake is that if you're not raising money in the right way, it's quite possible that actually you're asking the wrong person, right? And the way that this comes up is that there are funders fall into a very broad spectrum of different types. There are certain funders who will only fund certain types of project. So for example, an investor, a shareholder, for example, will typically only buy shares in businesses that are profitable, right? And so if you're asking a shareholder, an equity investor, to support essentially what is a charity, you're never going to make it, no matter how impactful your charity is. That's the wrong kind of investor, right? Secondly, investors segment themselves by the stage of enterprise that they invest in. So that there are some investors who will only come in for the very early stage when you're developing a prototype or when you're developing a concept. There are others who will only invest late stage when you've had years of track record and you're already out there delivering impact to customers, right? And so if you're going out to those late stage investors asking for money for an early stage prototype, you're never going to succeed. And so what we need to do is we need to help you identify who are the right type of investors for your organization at the stage where you're at. And then more specifically, who are the right type of investors to invest in the kind of projects that you generate, right? So that's what we're going to try and do with our fundraising strategy, is that we're going to do two things. We're firstly going to help you identify what are the projects that you are actually doing within your organization, right? So we're going to take it from the organization level and we're going to go to the project level. We're going to say this organization does 5 different things. It does A, B, C, D, E, right? And we're going to work out what those 5 different things are. Then we're going to show you the universe of funders that support different types of projects. And we're going to show you how to mix and match the relevant funder for the relevant project and put them together, right? And that is the fundraising strategy, right? It's what's the right project, what's the right funder, and how do you put them together in combination, different projects with different funders to give you the optimal way to raise finance for your entire organization, right? So this is our social investment toolkit methodology. And if you can unlock that, this is how you are essentially able to find the perfect funder for the perfect project and match those two together, right? Otherwise, what's happening is that you're probably trying to fit the whole jigsaw together in one go, and it doesn't fit. And that's the frustration that I think many of our Shoka fellows and clients have had over time. So three fundamental mistakes, just to quickly recap: not being clear what you're fundraising for, raising only one type of finance in the belief that one size fits all, right? It's got to be equity for everything. It's got to be grants for everything. No, it doesn't, and no, it shouldn't be. And finally, the wrong person. Will the late stage equity investor support my early stage charity? Clearly not, right? So let's come up with a better strategy for how do you mix and match those three together. And then I mentioned that those three mistakes are based on three fundamental misconceptions about fundraising. And again, just to recap what those are: funding the organization, not your projects; thinking it's got to be either or. In other words, it's got to be investments or it's got to be grants. Which one is right for me, right? And thinking that there's only one type of funding which funds everything, right? Again, that's really where the issues are. Yes, so again, this is the classic barrier that people don't even realize, right? They assume that a charity cannot raise any kind of investment. And yet the irony is that many charities actually have business models, right? I'm sure there are services that your organization is doing that actually could be charged for or subsidized, right? And so basically, it is possible. Investment requires a return. Grant funding doesn't require a return, right? Many organizations, however, have both a commercial aspect as well as a non-commercial aspect, right? And so when they try and raise funding, they hit this dilemma, which is that grant makers look at them and go, wait a minute, but you seem to be a little bit business-like, therefore we don't really trust you, right? At the same time, they go to an investor and the investor says, I'm sorry, I can't touch this because you don't make enough return, right? Or you don't make enough money. And so they often find that they can't actually raise any funding, or they're only limited to grants at that point, right? And they have to really downplay the services that they provide, or the service that they do that, right? And what we're going to show you in a moment is a strategy for how to unlock those two pieces, right? How to identify the bit that is the charity piece that doesn't make any money, and the bit that is the business piece that potentially does. And then we're going to show you how, even if you are a charity, you can find ways to isolate the business piece and then raise investment for that, right? And that's a strategy that we're going to come onto in just a moment. So thank you so much. That's a really, really great point. And I think you speak for many in the nonprofits who have that same thought, which is that I can't raise investment because I'm only an NGO. The answer is you can, but you have to structure it in the right way. And we're going to show you in a moment how you structure it. I think the answer is yes, they can, but in a special circumstance. Normally, that circumstance would be that you actually create a business and which raises investment, and you have a charity which does the grant raising, right? And then there's a legal structure which ties the two together, and that's a very common legal structure which many social entrepreneurs adopt in order to be able to raise both forms of capital. So charity to raise grants, business to raise investment. Maybe there's a parent that owns both or sits on top, or they have a relationship with each other in some way. But there's a whole range of legal strategies that you can adopt that would enable you to maximize different types of funding.